Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dongfang Hour China Aerospace News Roundup. This for the week of November 16th to 22nd. Before getting started, we would like to send a special thanks to our good friends at Go Taikonauts and at Spacewatch.global, two excellent sources for not just China, but in some cases, global space news. This week we're going to bring you updates on the launch of a Tiantong satellite, another funding round from one of China's premier commercial satellite manufacturers, yet another space company, commercial launch company emerging from another province. But first, Jean is going to give us a rundown of a ChinaSat 16 5G test.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to welcome you aboard the Dongfang Hour. Please make sure your seatbelt is securely fastened. Thank you.
士们、先生们，预计空中飞行时间2小时15分钟，我们预计在当地时间下午6点25分左右到达。
Jean, take it away on the ChinaSat 16 5G test.
So the first piece of news this week is about China Satcom announcing that it completed a 5G test with its HTS Ka-band satellite ChinaSat 16 that was launched in 2017 or 2018, if I'm not mistaken. This test was done in collaboration with Huawei, who, as we know, is quite big in all the 5G base stations on the ground, but they're also quite good with the terminals, the phones, the 5G phones themselves. And also this was done in collaboration with China Mobile, which is one of the three big telcos of China. So the actual test basically was a 5G satellite backhaul test. So it was connecting basically China Mobile's 5G wireless base station, presumably Huawei technology, to the 5G core network. And this was done through ChinaSat 16. So the test included file transfer, voice calling, as well as high definition video on demand. And I think this is quite a breakthrough also for China Satcom and for China 5G in general for several reasons. The first one is that, we know that for 5G there is a coverage issue in remote areas. Also noting that 5G, the frequency of 5G is higher than 4G, meaning that higher frequency usually means you have a lower coverage area for a given base station compared to lower frequencies. And this just shows that potentially we could have coverage of remote areas, which was an issue for 4G. And the second interesting point also is that we see China Satcom diversifying its scope of activity into 5G backhauling. And they did a little bit of 4G backhauling as well in the past with the three Chinese telcos. But I think this is also more generally a global problem for a lot of for satellite operators in general that are impacted by the drop of the satellite TV activity and that are more and more trying to diversify into other activities to catch up with this drop of activity. So Blaine, I don't know how big satellite TV is within the scope of China Satcom, but I presumably they have some.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly to your point, this is an indicative of a more global trend, which is to say, we have seen now for probably 5 or 10 years satellite capacity becoming cheaper on a per gigabit per second basis, and this has been in particular true relative to terrestrial connectivity. So, for example, if we think about what it would have cost to lay a terrestrial fiber line 10 years ago versus now, those costs are relatively similar in terms of it still involves a lot of the same processes. In terms of a satellite, you've seen a sort of 100 times increase roughly in the sort of cost per gigabit per second. So you're seeing much, much cheaper bandwidth. And this is now, to your point, it's particularly important as networks are becoming, the cells are becoming smaller. So you're having smaller amounts of coverage per each individual backhaul tower. And as you're seeing the average person requiring more bandwidth or expecting more bandwidth. And it's interesting because in China, I mean, I've been to some pretty rural parts of China, and the 4G coverage remains quite good. Now, I mean, I have not been to like the top of Mount Everest or parts of the Himalayas on the Chinese side. I have not been. I presume the 4G there is less good. But in general, I mean, the terrestrial connectivity in China is really, really good. Now, to your question about sort of satellite TV and how big of a role is that for China Satcom, it's quite large in the sense that China Satcom has a monopoly in China for satellite TV. I mean, there's a bunch of provincial satellite television channels that are being broadcast, and China Satcom broadcasts all of them. Or they would use APT satellite capacity for some of that, but then they're basically buying it from APT and then reselling it. So you have a situation where China Satcom for a long time has had a pretty good, stable business of broadcasting like provincial TV stations. Those TV stations are now starting to face some degree of financial pressure because, there's a lot of people that are no longer watching linear TV, even in China. And so now, to your point, China Satcom is needing to diversify and go into things like mobility. So you've seen a lot more emphasis on maritime and on IFC and on 5G or, again, 4G as well. And it's interesting because with ChinaSat 16, to your point, it was launched in April of 2017. And China Satcom has struggled to fill this satellite. At the very beginning, when it was launched, China Satcom made a deal with Gilat, which is an Israeli satellite ground equipment manufacturer, really interesting, innovative company. They do a lot of things in different markets. And they're one of the relatively few foreign companies to have some degree of success in China. And they basically had a deal with China Satcom to develop a bunch of different Ka-band applications for ChinaSat 16 and for the subsequent ChinaSat 18, which was meant to launch in 2018 or 2019, and it failed. So you have a situation now where ChinaSat 16 is kind of covering half of China with Ka-band capacity. ChinaSat 18 was meant to cover the other half, but again, that failed after launch, or at launch. And so I don't know how full ChinaSat 16 is now. And certainly, COVID probably did not help in terms of IFC adoption. I know that China has pretty much gone back to normal in a lot of areas, but still, I think that the shock to the travel industry would have been quite large, and I think state-owned airlines were conservative already. Certainly, I guess, to make a long story short, this is definitely an instance of China Satcom trying to diversify and fill a satellite that probably is not especially full right now, and doing so in an interesting way to the extent that they're partnering with a couple of very powerful companies in the value chain, so Huawei and China Mobile. One other point I would mention was just the test results in terms of speeds. I don't think you mentioned before. So 90 megabits per second was the download speed, 3.5 megabits per second upload speed, which sounds quite respectable, and then a ping of 700 milliseconds because GEO is still quite far. So 3/4 of a second. It's probably not ideal for live streaming or for playing online games, but it can work. So anything else, John, on ChinaSat 16, or shall we move over to Tiantong?
Let's move to Tiantong, and your mention of alternative services to alternative services to satellite TV is a great segue. So Tiantong-1 space 02 is a geostationary satellite that was put into orbit by a Long March 3B on November the 12th. And Tiantong-1 is a geostationary satellite constellation. It can be considered as what they call China's response to other global narrowband constellations such as Inmarsat, Thuraya, and also others, Iridium. Although that would be low Earth orbit. And basically what this sort of communication is, what narrowband is as opposed to satellite broadband frequencies such as Ka and Ku, these are lower frequencies, these are narrower bandwidths, and this generally means that we're talking about speeds that are we're talking basically about dozens of kilobits per second or hundreds of kilobits per second. So that's slow. You're definitely not going to do live streaming with this sort of narrowband service. But it's sufficient for a lot of applications such as, for example, voice communication. It can also be used to transmit very small data, typically, for example, tracking information or machine-to-machine data. It can also be used, for example, for short messages. So a lot of applications. And it also has one major advantage regarding the fact that it has narrow bandwidths. It usually means that antennas and the terminal itself can be much more compact. So when you think of applications such as a satellite phone, definitely you would want to go for this type of bandwidth and not basically, I don't think a Ka-band satellite phone that would hold in your hand is technologically possible. So this is an important piece of news because this shows that there's a growing challenge to Thuraya and Inmarsat, these two companies having significant markets in China. Although I would add that Tiantong-1 is not a full-fledged challenge just yet to these two companies. The first fact is that it doesn't have a global coverage. They launched the first Tiantong-1 satellite, the Tiantong-1 satellite was launched in 2016. They launched the second satellite so last week on the 12th of November, and the final satellite will be launched next year. It's the Tiantong-1-03. And together, these three satellites will cover China, the Western Pacific that's bordering China, as well as Southeast Asia. And the last satellite that's to be launched next year will be covering the Middle East and Central Asia. So basically you have a broad coverage of the Belt and Road countries. So still not a global coverage, but definitely a coverage of areas where Chinese companies are more and more active. And there is also discussion, although this is not confirmed, of launching a Tiantong-1, 04, and 05 in 2023 and 2025, and this would probably mean, I would guess, a global coverage. Now, I think the challenge for Thuraya and Inmarsat and others is twofold. So the first one is a lot of the Chinese customers of these two companies would be, I would guess, state-owned companies or state-linked companies such as CIMC and other companies, and these very possibly could make the switch to Tiantong-1 services. So that's the first point. And the second point is that I think the Chinese would be quite aggressive in terms of the pricing policy for their bandwidth. There was something in the article that we'll link here in the YouTube video on paying 1,000 RMB per month for this service, although there wasn't any detail on what you'd get for that amount. But that does sound quite competitive. And also at least that's how the national narrative goes, is that the Chinese would be extremely competitive also in terms of terminals, notably ground terminals, maybe on the ground, on a car, or maybe for maritime applications. And you have companies like CETC that are very active in making all kinds of terminals for this sort of narrowband application. So I think definitely a growing challenge and competition for the narrowband global service providers in, I'd say, the next 4 or 5 years. Do you have any thoughts on the Tiantong-1 constellation, Blaine?
Well, you covered it pretty well. Just a couple of other points. I guess one other point. So it reminds me. I don't know if Thuraya has since gotten market access, but I remember some few years ago when Thuraya had not yet gotten market access to China, and again, they might still not have it. I don't know. But they were being sold on Taobao sort of illegally, like Thuraya sat phones, and it was just kind of it was not being sold by Thuraya. It was being sold by sort of some reseller who bought it elsewhere. But it's just interesting that this service that was not allowed. It was this gray market that was kind of allowed on Taobao, and that was, I guess, back in like the sort of 2016, 2017 days when that sort of thing was probably a bit easier to do. But yeah, certainly those types of businesses will become more difficult as the Chinese versions of as Tiantong, as it were, comes into the market. Yeah.
I remember at some point seeing China Mobile commercializing some Thuraya terminals, although that was a while ago, and I don't know to what extent that was a big thing. But I know that a lot of Chinese companies are using Thuraya, but abroad. So basically, not directly in China, but when they're in other maritime areas outside of China.
That makes sense, yeah, because they've got I remember Thuraya, that was one of the first product launch events I ever went to. They had what's called the Sat Sleeve, which was like a thing that you could put on your iPhone, and you turn your iPhone into a Thuraya satellite phone, basically. So you just have a standard iPhone, and then inside your iPhone there was an app, like the Thuraya app, and so you could then just go into the app, and you have a satellite phone. So it was pretty, back at like Satellite 2013, I think, in Washington, D.C., they had their product launch for that. That was good fun. So onward now to Galaxy Space, unless you have any more information on Tiantong.
All good.
Galaxy Space, quite possibly the most valuable Chinese commercial space company after this most recent funding round. So the company announced a funding round last week. They did not announce the amount of the funding round. However, they did announce the company's valuation at the time of the funding round, which was 8 billion yuan. So it's about 1.2-ish, 1.15 billion US dollars. So it makes them officially a unicorn. And this is an increase from 5 billion RMB at the most recent funding round prior to this, which was in September 2019. So we've seen an increase of 60% in company valuation over the course of 1 year. And again, they are now a unicorn. Noteworthily, I think, so this round of funding, there were a number of investors. Several of them were return investors that were quite high profile. So the two most noteworthy ones would be Shunwei, which is the venture capital firm of Lei Jun, the CEO of Xiaomi, and they're very actively involved in a lot of different sort of like IoT and 5G broadband kind of plays. And then Matrix China, and then also one other VC called Chaos China, which I wanted to give them a special shout out because that's just a great name for a venture capital firm. Chaos China. That is excellent. The other noteworthy investor from this round, however, was the Nantong, sort of the Nantong Science Entrepreneurs Fund kind of things, the Nantong Heji Chuangye Ziben. And so they basically, Nantong Heji Chuangye Touzi. And so this Nantong it's the Nantong city government essentially. So Nantong is the city where Galaxy Space is building their so-called super factory, which is meant to produce between 300 and 500 satellites per year. And Nantong, it's a city in, I'm going to say Jiangsu, I'm pretty sure. It should be Jiangsu. And it's a relatively wealthy city. It's about $14,000 per capita GDP as far back as 2016. So quite developed. And it's interesting because we've seen a lot of different provincial or city level VC funds invest into the new space companies that are building something in their town or province. So like Huzhou with land space, or like several companies in the Sichuan area. But I think with Nantong, it appears, at least at first glance, that their sort of city level VC is somewhat more used to investing in high tech or otherwise high risk and sophisticated industries. So for example, I had a look around the website of this VC, and they have a lot of investments already in things like biotech or e-health, this sort of thing. And I guess that's not terribly surprising when you consider that Nantong, again, it would have been rather developed already, say, 10 years ago. And so, again, I could imagine the provincial or city level venture capital firms there just being a bit more mature. Might be a little bit unfair to those in other provinces, but basically a bit more, let's say, mature than their counterparts in some of these parts of China that would have developed more recently. So yeah, I think this is definitely, it's another example, as we've continuously discussed, this example of provincial governments helping the commercial space companies that are setting up in their city or province. And yeah, we have China's first officially saying they are a unicorn. I don't know to what extent we can take their word for that, but hey, they said it, so I am not going to. Came straight from the unicorn's mouth, as it were. Jean, anything to add on your side about the Galaxy Space fundraising?
I think they announced at some point that they had an annual capacity of 300 to 500 satellites, right? And so just some food for thought. Their constellation, the Galaxy constellation, is about 900 satellites. So this annual capacity, either it's total overkill, I think, for the Galaxy constellation, either they're planning to provide these satellites to another constellation or constellations S with so plural. Either they're anticipating, an increase of the size of the Galaxy constellation. Like Starlink started out with 12,000 satellites, now it's a 42,000 satellite constellation. So either way, I think that this very big capacity of satellites annually is a pre-announcement of something that will be something that's pretty big, I would guess.
So just two other things on this point, and then we will move into our last real news item of the day. So I guess the one point is in the press release of announcing this B+ funding round, they did not at any point mention the Galaxy constellation that you mentioned. So they planned this constellation for some year, since they were founded. But I've been noticing that over the last, say, year to year and a half, in their press releases, they have not really explicitly said, oh, we have this Galaxy constellation plan. It's been more, we plan to manufacture many hundred satellites for some plan. The other thing I would mention, last point about this announcement, is that they did note that their second satellite is in the final stages of assembly. So Galaxy Space launched their first demonstration satellite at the beginning of this year, I believe. And their second one, again, final stages of assembly, so we're kind of, we're on the lookout. I don't know if it's any day now, or any week now, or any month now, but, good luck to Galaxy Space. Okay, so moving into our last kind of real news topic of the week, we have the emergence of yet another commercial launch company from yet another province that up to this point, as far as I know, did not have its own commercial launch company, and that is the emergence of Shandong Space, or Shandong-1. Shandong-1, they posted a series of job vacancies on a WeChat account of the Shandong Institute of Space Technology. They do not appear to have their own website. There's not a whole lot of additional information available about Shandong-1. However, we do know that, we note that they are hiring for positions such as sort of a general rocket designer kind of person, which is to imply, it seems like, that they are building a sort of systems level rocket as opposed to focusing on some subsystems level element of a rocket. And at some point, if I would like to do the math of how many provinces now have their own rocket company, but probably Shandong would have been the sort of the largest and most developed province to not have its own rocket company. So Shandong has over 100 million people, and it's relatively well developed. I would guess it's probably the third or fourth largest provincial GDP in China, if I had to guess, which would probably put it at something around, let's say, 1.2 to 1.5 trillion US dollars per year. So yeah, big place, big economy, and do they need their own rocket company? Who knows? But they have one, so that's good. Jean, anything from you on Shandong Space, or are we?
Yeah, when you sent me that link on Shandong Space, I literally rolled my eyes. It's really becoming a routine now. 1 week, one new satellite company. Who knows what will come up next week? I don't know how these companies are going to commercialize. This company, from the look of the job offers they're proposing, they're really they're a new company. They're hiring the entire team. So the question is, they're a latecomer. So and they don't have the notoriety of an iSpace or of a X-Space or a land space, and they don't have any launch success story to put forward to any of the future clients. And we know that solid rockets, light lift solid rockets, are really the most crowded market there is in China right now in terms of offer, and we don't know how much market pull there is going to be for this type of launch. So big question mark there, and really looking forward to see how this is going to turn out in the coming 1 or 2 years.
It's pretty crazy how many provincial launch companies there are. It's like I can't imagine like the state of Arizona ever just saying, Arizona, we need our own launcher company. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
but,
the city of Toulouse needs its own launch company.
Yeah, indeed. All right, so on to our last news item of the week, which is a debatably serious news item. So on Twitter earlier this last week, we saw news of an autonomous KFC truck cart sort of thing driving around Shanghai, whereby one can walk up to this KFC cart and scan the QR code and buy some chicken, and the door of the cart opens and there's the chicken. And that in and of itself is pretty astonishing. But then I noticed that there was a 5G advertisement also on this autonomous thing. So you have this, it is an autonomous KFC 5G truck sort of thing driving around the suburbs of Shanghai, selling the Shanghainese pre-cooked autonomously driven chicken. And so this is this is life in China in 2020. This is it. Jean, any
definitely
thoughts?
We definitely have to put a picture of that on the YouTube video. Of that truck.
I'm gonna hunt it down.
I have a feeling that this 5G keyword is really overused in China, and last week we spoke about a 5G satellite being launched and how there's a controversy of the satellite actually not being a 6G satellite last week being launched, and there's a controversy of the satellite not being 6G at all. 6G is not being a defined telecommunications technology just yet, and there are a lot of sarcastic comments on the Chinese internet saying we have 5G satellites, we have 6G satellites, we have AI satellites today. At least that's what the company's making them call them. And some comments are saying, hey, we're just missing a blockchain satellite now. Who wants to come up with a blockchain satellite? So I found that pretty amusing.
Well, and we know a few companies that are trying to do that. So that's good luck to all of them as well. So yeah, I think that's about it for the news of the week. So we will be looking forward to posting later this week or next week our very long form interview with Kevin Xu, which I reviewed last night, and I was pretty. I'm pretty happy with it. I think we got some good discussion from Kevin. I'm looking forward to hearing the community's responses to that. I think Kevin really gave a lot of interesting insights to I don't know, what was it like to be going into Chinese commercial space 5 years ago, and now how has it changed in that 5 years? That's a crazy thing to hear somebody talk about this in, like saying, oh yeah, when I went to land space, there was one graduate at land space. Now we're getting hundreds of applicants per year. It's like, wow. So be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, this has been another episode of the Dongfang Hour Aerospace News Roundup for the week of November 16th to 22nd. We look forward to seeing you next week, which is the last week of November. And anything else, Jean, from your side? Are we all good?
I am all good.
Great. Thank you all for listening. We look forward to interacting with you soon. Have a good day.
Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.